Well, I think you've got a lot of resilience and staying power, all of you, because I'm sure you've had a really fantastically great day, but you must be pooped and waiting for whatever big party you're going to next. So we'll just let a few people leave, and hopefully a few more people come and join us and say, yes, hello, I'm Shan, and I'm just looking for my clock, actually, because I've been told we have to finish at 4:30. Where is it? Because there's nothing on it at the moment. I can't see anything. It will start when I say start. It's started now. Good. Well, I don't want them to tell me off for keeping you all waiting. So today we are going to be talking about the future of legal services in the context of why we're all here today at CogX, which is obviously about that cluster of technologies and new thinking summarises AI. So we've got some really interesting people. Ben has kindly read out their names and their job titles. So I'm just going to remind you of their names, and what they care about and what they do will become evident in how they're talking. And I think we're going to be scared. Yes, there they are. Okay, good. But I learned a few things about these guys when I was having an initial conversation with them separately. So I'm just going to repeat back what I think I learned. And if you've got a problem with it, guys, just let me know, okay? So the thing about this is, okay, this is a structured conversation. We've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. We've got some questions, some stimulus questions, really, that we've agreed between us, but not in a scripted, stilted way. We also want you to take part. I don't want you to be scared by that, but I do want you to think that at any point you can stick up your hand. You probably have to shout because it will take 2 minutes to come and find you with a microphone. But do participate because this isn't a lecture, okay? So I'm going to start next to me with a lovely Jeremy. Everyone's lovely, by the way. There's no gender significance applied to that. So what I learned about Jeremy was that he has some real nitty-gritty experience of managing ventures. He would say starting and probably not finishing ventures, but that's entrepreneurialism, isn't it? So he also said to me, I've never been a hardcore coder, but I've always put myself where the change is happening. And I think that's a description that could apply to lots of us, right? Moving on to Alastair, whose hair I've been annoyingly commenting on since I met him today, because I do think it's a thing of beauty. But actually, Alastair's very grown up. He manages data analytics and machine learning for a very grown-up law firm, Mishcon. And what I took from my conversation with Alastair was that he left academia, was a very successful consultant, went to Mishcon to help them solve a specific problem, and has never left. Because once their clients worked out there was a data guy who could help them with their untapped data, they kept wanting to see him. That's what I took from our conversation, Alastair. Is that okay? Moving on to Sue McClean then, who's a tech lawyer, one of 2 lawyers on the panel. Jeremy is the other qualified lawyer. And Sue has some really interesting interests across tech, fintech, diversity and inclusion, what responsible tech actually is. And from Sue's experience, what she's gleaned is that, at least for lawyers, we're all tech lawyers now. Right, Sue? Yeah, you remember that one. And then finally is Ruth, who also has a very grown-up job with Luminance, who are a law tech specialising in at-scale AI-powered documentation review. And actually, Ruth was very interesting because obviously she's coming from the inside out. She has venture experience and all kinds of other experience. She glossed over the I was a neuroscientist bit, though, which I was really interested in. So we may or may not want to probe into that a little bit further in the course of this conversation. Okay, so what I've asked the guys to do is I've asked them to take about 3 minutes to talk to you about one example which for them stands out as a really excellent example of how their firms have changed how they think and what they do for and with customers and or colleagues in response to all the issues that are thrown up by AI technologies. Okay, so they're going to take about 3 minutes each. We won't interrupt at that point, but I am going to say, does anybody want to have any questions or observations once you've heard what they've got to say? Okay, so I'm going to start with Jeremy, here to my left. Jeremy, your 3 minutes starts now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Could I just get by a show of hands, how many people in the audience were, or want to become a lawyer? Oh, okay. Welcome. Thank you. So I guess in response to the question, what are we doing to bring AI into the legal sector, or at least bring it into our firm? As many of you, possibly many of you who put your hands up know, and for those that you don't, the legal profession really hasn't changed too much. 250 years, probably. The only thing that changed is that the pen was exchanged for a word processor. So this is a really incredible time to be, I think, in the legal profession. And I think acknowledging, of course, that the lawyers are experts in their own right, in their own craft. And so probably the biggest thing that we did was recognizing that the lawyers should remain legal experts. We shouldn't necessarily try to get them to learn a whole new way of working or a whole new system. And so we focused on bringing in new skill sets and new people, primarily in our Newcastle hub, but that has now permeated a lot of our European operations. And I think these people, by and large, are younger. They're much more comfortable with change, and we've given them some space. We've set up innovation teams, change teams, and they are now sitting as, I suppose, experts on the technology alongside a lot of our lawyers. And that may sound good, but lawyers typically were used to working by themselves. And so we had to also engage in quite an extensive change management program to get everybody used to working together as a larger team.
Thanks very much.
Hello. So I concur with everything that was just said. I guess from Mishcon's perspective, probably this strangest thing that's happened in recent years, being the last year or so, is starting to hire people like me. So don't have a lawyer background at all. I guess background in tech startups at some level, in data science, and then teaching sort of predictive systems design. And I think it's very early on. I think my second startup, we automated a license to occupy in the kind of real estate space, and that kind of got me interested in these types of systems. That was just a document tree, and it was a multi-sided marketplace where either side selected certain options, and that produced a document that was time-stamped on the server. But I think, from my perspective, I see legal technology as a foundational technology, in the sense that you can't really run anything, a country or a company, or even a set of civil interactions without having that kind of legal substrate. And so I think it's a very interesting time to think about how the existing technologies that have been invented can support current processes, and how you might start to reinvent some of those systems in being able to deliver legal services going forward.
So would you say that you've helped Mishcon to understand how to respond differently to this AI environment that we're in?
Starting to. I think ultimately we're trying to provide the best quality service for our customers, and if that sort of mandates that we have to exploit the best possible solution at any particular point in time, and if it turns out that these types of systems help deliver that, then it's important. And where they don't help deliver that, then it's less important.
Hi there, good afternoon. I think I come here representing Baker McKenzie as my law firm, but I'm also a trustee at the Society for Computers and Law, which is the sort of tech law network in the UK. And I've been a lawyer for 20 years, and I agree. I think we've evolved, and we're the start of a very interesting journey in terms of our use of technology. We are testing, deploying, working with AI solutions at my firm, and I think, to me, the biggest opportunity it has given us is to really rethink what value do we add as lawyers, as a law firm. And of course, there's lots of exciting technologies and startups like Luminance that can really help reduce costs and make us much more efficient in terms of discovery and M&A processes and all that kind of activity. But actually, to me, the really exciting next step is when you're talking about using AI technology to help with the judgment piece, with the sort of data-driven advice. Because a lot of companies come to a law firm, they want to know what the law is, but actually what they really want to know is, what would you do? What should I do in this scenario? And at the moment, that's very specific to a particular lawyer's experience or a range of lawyers' experience. But if we can use technology and AI to give the whole sort of enterprise intelligence to a client and really embed AI in all the different aspects of our rules, I think that's the future, that the AI can be such a helpful tool to help us do our jobs better. And as well as that, actually, it gives us an opportunity to provide new services and products to clients that we couldn't provide before. And so it's much more than just an efficiency play. It's a transforming the way we operate. And that's what I think is particularly exciting, and why particularly the younger members of the team really love the prospect of, not doing the drudge work. Let the technology do that. Where's the more strategic, exciting, interesting work? And let's use technology to enable that.
I'm actually going to mirror some of the things that Sue just said. I think from the other side, from being a legal tech provider, what we've seen and what we've been able to do as an AI company is help law firms and lawyers be more competitive and more creative, and just be able to do what they set out in their careers to do initially, which is provide the kind of strategic advice that they wanted to, rather than spend hours and hours marking up documents that they don't need to be doing, that can be the work, as you said, can be given away to the AI. And I think we've only been around 2.5 years, almost 3, and I think the shift we've seen in that short space of time has been probably more drastic than in the 10 years beforehand. And I think we'll just see it speed up as more and more law firms and people providing legal advice, including the Big Four, kind of adopt this technology. It's really leveled the playing field from the tiny 3-person law firms in Norway to the 10,000 people global law firms, around the world. So I think it's leveled the playing field that way.
So there's some really interesting issues in there, aren't there, around what does data-driven advice and predictive judgment look like or not. There's the issue of your contention, Ruth, that actually the kind of technologies and developments that Luminance kind of leads on is actually helping what you might call both small and larger incumbent firms to cope with some really big shifts, the service firms moving in to provide legal services. So really interesting issues, and we'll come back to those. But I'd like to dig in a little bit into some of the other areas that you all mentioned, which is around the change in the customer mindset and how they articulate what they need from you. So can I come to you first, Sue, and just share with us your views and observations as a very seasoned tech lawyer on those sorts of changes and shifts that have made you think?
Well, I think certainly almost all of our clients are focused on this issue. It's just that a lot of them are more mature than others. So I think, for one, they just assume that if there is technology that's available to make our jobs more efficient and reduce cost, the kind of default is that we should be using it. It's not like that's a added value. That's just what we should be doing. So there's an assumption from a lot of clients that their firms should be using the technologies that are available. I think there's also a view that we should really be ahead of them. The law firm should be ahead of in-house in terms of how we use technology.
Ahead, sorry, darling, did you say ahead?
Ahead in terms of expertise and knowledge. So we have quite a few clients who will come to us and say, look, we want to innovate our in-house legal team. What technologies have you used? What could you recommend to us? Can you introduce us? If firms are not ahead of their clients, that's not a good place to be. And I think quite a few law firms in the sector have to get up to speed because it's just now taken as read that you should be in that space.
So you're expected to be able to be an expert, really, on the latest technologies, applying them and so forth. Anything else in what they're fundamentally asking from you as a lawyer, perhaps, as well?
Yes, I mean, I think what we have to do as lawyers, I think, is really approach the problem with the client. Sometimes there's a sort of too much, I've got a new shiny toy, and some clients are really not ready for some of the technologies yet. So it's really, I think, they're asking us to be collaborative with them to try and figure out what their problems are and how we can help them and how we can provide our services better to them. But they're also asking for slightly different areas of advice than historically, at least in my field in technology, that they're asking, what do you think about these issues, which are ultimately much more ethical and reputational issues than pure, what does the law say? And I think that's a really interesting space for us too.
Yeah, and we're going to hopefully come back and talk about that again in a moment. I was interested in what you said when we were in our pre-chats around customers being used to, I know how to contract for this particular eventuality or deal with your help, but this is AI. What's different there? That's something that you said has been a sort of familiar approach, and people saying, well, what is the difference between that and AI?
Yeah, and I think there's AI where the client is buying it into the legal team, and then there's broader, almost every organization now is buying technology. So this is why I say every lawyer needs to kind of be a tech lawyer now, is because if you're an M&A lawyer or you're in finance or you work for an energy company, your company is doing projects that involve innovation, and therefore there's a whole upskilling of the legal profession around our understanding of a technology, both in terms of how we practice our law and in terms of, the business advice we're giving to our clients in-house or out or in private practice.
Thank you, Sue. We'll come back, as we say, we'll come back to some of those issues as well. Jeremy, if I can come to you. So you're running, you were in it pretty much at the beginning of a quite a substantial innovation unit within Norton Rose. So not only are you and your team, I guess, responding to a different set of challenges or issues, but you're also trying in some ways to equip the firm for those kinds of evolving customer needs that Sue's just been talking about. Do you want to share some perspectives on how you think the customer needs have changed and are continuing to change?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to provide a bit of background, in 2016, 5 of us went to a rented office in Newcastle upon Tyne. We had 6 months of budget to prove a model, which was to set up an innovation center and a process center. Fast forward to today, we have 2 purpose-built floors, and we're going to be about 150 staff by the end of this year. It's been wildly successful and is largely attributed to the fact that we were given space and freedom to run it like a startup. I'm extremely proud of that, and extremely proud to have been part of that. But I think the motivation behind it was partially that there was a need to experiment. We needed a safe place away from the mothership. That's not a new concept whatsoever. That's been repeated in lots and lots of books about corporate innovation. And we tried to follow as many different examples as we could to do that. I think along that journey, what we also realized was that, and Sue, I'm sure you guys have this conversation all the time. Lawyers got really, really good at the what, at delivering the legal advice. But once you had a lot of big global firms all operating in that space, there wasn't really a lot to distinguish the what from each other. So now our customers are just as concerned with the how. How are you going to deliver this product or this service or this advice or a combination of all those things to us in the most effective and efficient way? And I think that there's nothing unique about law. I think every sector and industry is like that, but it's now I think law firms are being looked at much more as providing a packaged product and not just a standalone service. And I think our Newcastle operation largely helped us to define what the how was and experiment with different ways of doing that.
So that packaged offering, that's a client view in at you as well as a house view out, looking at the scenario. Yes? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeremy. We're doing well, I think. Ruth, your whole business is about educating and selling to insurers as customers, legals and all sorts of customers. Do you want to give us some of your thoughts on what you've seen and what your business has learnt about how customers' needs are changing and how they talk about that?
So when we started, we had obviously to convince our customers, which are you guys, the law firms, to adopt us and to innovate and to kind of use us in their real day-to-day work. And I think we've kind of got past that in the last year, and now it's actually helping, like you said, the law firms themselves convince their customers to use and adopt this AI technology. And so we've sold the lawyers, and now we're helping the lawyers sell to their customers. And I think we are starting to see that a lot of your customers are coming to you as well to understand, and we're kind of working more in unison with ours in order to convince their clients that they should be using this technology and that they will benefit as much as the law firm will benefit. But not just that, I think we are becoming part of an offering and helping our legal client, law firm clients to provide like a greater range of offerings and what they can provide to their customer. I think we have got a lot of a real variation of customers in terms of law firms and insurers, as you mentioned. And I think when people see the benefit of using AI in their transaction or their deal, and knowing that now so let me give you an example. One of our customers, a London-based law firm, they had a client come to them to ask them to look through a data room that was a competitor of theirs they wanted to acquire. And it was quite time sensitive, and they had been told that in their customer agreements, 90% of those customer agreements had auto-renewal clauses in. So they were very like, great, this is going to be really worth the money, we should acquire as quick as possible. The customer, our customer, it's hard, customer, using our technology found that actually only 30% of those customer agreements had auto-renewal.
And that was because your system chunked through a massive load of...
They could do it in, I think it was a quarter of the time, and look at every single document and see that only 30% of them had an auto-renewal clause, which actually basically made the bottom of that deal fall out, and they didn't acquire it after all. And I think that demonstrates that people now want comprehensive. They're not going to rely on sampling as a way to validate what they're looking at. And I think you'll find maybe a little bit further on in the future, in the bigger deals, that insurers won't underwrite these deals without knowing that you have comprehensively gone through everything. And you're just not going to be able to with the amount of data there. So the only way you'll be able to do that is to use and employ AI technology. Yeah.
That's really interesting, actually, isn't it, actually, Alastair? Do you remember when we were having our pre-chat, you talked about due diligence? Do you remember that? Is it coming back to you? Sue, would you give him the microphone? If you don't want to talk about that idea, shall I remind you? You were talking about... okay, there's one route, yes, which is to go through all of the stuff, whether it's manually or automatically, but the other route is to do some predictive analysis, as I understood it, to say, well, what's the risk? How big is the risk? And let me insure against a crap outcome, rather than necessarily doing the work.
Yeah, certainly. I think there's... we've got a variety of different projects that think about... So probably I spend, let's say, a third of my time doing... business process mining to a certain extent, right? What are we doing now? What have we done in the past? And then I probably spend about a third of my time doing sort of process improvement, which is, how could we do what we already do better? And then I probably spend a third of my time sort of reimagining, well, if we were going to start and do this from scratch, how would we do it? And I think there is a certain number of those problems where the legal risk may be solved from a client perspective better by offering assurance against that risk than, doing the current set of legal due diligence.
So is that a twinkle in Alastair's eye at the moment, or is that something that you're actually testing out with potential customers in terms of whether or not, how... Because customers always need to feel comfortable about new stuff, don't we?
Well, so... I think that's very much at the research end of things. But if I go back to your original question, which was... what are people asking for? And I say this from the perspective of a non-lawyer, because I'm not offering legal services front of house, so to speak. But, I joined the firm on a non-fee earning basis, and now I spend an appreciable amount of time on client projects. And I think that the mindset is one of, we're talking about tech, and the connotation for him being at a tech festival is that this is sort of new and interesting. And yes, there have been some market improvements, but we're talking about engineering. Yeah, we're talking about all companies being able to provide engineering solutions that are best in class for their clients, right? And that one end of that spectrum is advisory on this is what we tell you you should do. And part of that is, by the mid part of the spectrum is, this is what you should do and this is how you should do it. And the other part of the end of the spectrum is, we can do this for you. And we are on that journey about providing a broader spectrum of legal solutions.
That fits in across that spectrum of services, or do you think there's some major gaps at either point in that?
I think, again, I say this from a slight perspective of naivety, but given, if you think about an access to justice agenda, the majority of the market never receives any legal recourse at all. So in some sense, there is a huge untapped legal market, that whereas maybe you would insure, let's figure out what people spend on average on insurance products each year, thousands, and some significant percentage of that will be really trying to find legal solutions, guidance or advice or otherwise, right? And we don't really know how that is going to play out. That's not suggesting we're trying to, that's not looking at existing insurance products per se, or the way that insurance is currently understood, but there is an emerging area where what you're looking for is outcomes.
Yeah.
And you can build solutions that provide the best possible outcomes.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm just going to pause there. Questions, observations? Yes. Can you shout? Because we'll waste time otherwise.
How do you? I'm almost done now. How do you get over the issue of confidentiality with creating AI solutions that are accurate in your organisations?
Great question, and that might also bring in the issue of limits versus responsibilities as well, right? So, who wants to tackle that one first? Sue, you look like you wish to.
Well, I can talk about one of the big challenges for adoption is lack of data, right? And historically, law firms have been, natural competitors, and we're not necessarily, we have silos even within organizations, right? At Baker McKenzie, we're in something like 74 offices across 46 jurisdictions. And one of the biggest challenges we have to the use of AI really effectively is, not having to build the building blocks of a cloud strategy for a start, but there are challenges to that, one of which is legal obligations, risks, confidentiality, and actually attitudes at the client. So trying to persuade the client that we can do this in a way that protects their trade secrets and their important confidential information is a real challenge. But even if we can get over that, at the moment, if we really want to get into data-driven and kind of predictive products, we don't have data in the right format and structured in a way, and enough of it, to really train the systems effectively. So a lot of the work we're doing is kind of, I know somebody in the law tech space talks about bring back boring. There is an awful lot of homework that has to be done around data and knowledge management and bringing all the information and insights you have in a firm together to really make the most of this technology. And I also think we all have to work together as customers more collaboratively across the sector, because if people like Luminance are going to be able to scale, so that we're all using these products in a really effective way for our clients, we kind of all need to be using them, rather than, if Baker McKenzie just adopts a tool, it's not going to be good enough for the whole sector.
So that's great.
So there's loads of work to do.
It's really interesting about, the practicalities of, do we have enough data? Where do we get it from? How is it going to change the way that big groups, whether they're tech companies and law firms, work together? But I guess the question was really about the confidentiality. Were you concerned about or interested in hearing answers about privacy, or was it compliance, or was it both? Practical of how? Okay. So there are some systemic blockages.
I think you need to work really closely with your security teams. There are solutions we are working with, ring-fenced encrypted spaces, but you do need all the stakeholders in the firm to be on side to make it actually happen and persuade maybe some naysayers that this has got to be the way we move forward. Otherwise, we're just going to be held back. I don't know how you've dealt with these issues at Mishcon or Norton Rose, but it's a kind of ongoing.
Yeah, it's a big issue that needs to be unravelled, doesn't it? Any other questions? Yes. At law school, yes.
Thanks. The question relates to the people that you actually have to employ if you want to sort of build up an AI part in your company. We, as those who train lawyers or what is supposed to be future lawyers, think about how do you want to do that? And we are currently having a debate where some of us say, well, we just want to educate normal lawyers, and the tech thing should be other people like computer scientists who know a bit about law.
Yeah.
Or should we rather, of course, continue to train the normal lawyers, but should we
So how much tech do you need to train as a lawyer in today's world?
As well?
Yeah, great question. Who wants to take that, Jeremy?
Yeah. Somewhat coincidentally, and perhaps interestingly to your question, we are now working with the University of York on precisely that, to answer that question. We're really lucky, I think, that most of the places where you might want to study law, you can also study computer science. And they're, I think, at the very meta level, both lawyers and computer scientists are learning how to solve complex problems. And so what we did with the University of York is we built a module where you have it taught partially by computer science and partially by lawyers, or partially by law. And it's about building a product. And I guess to the earlier point about access to justice, that's the perfect opportunity. You put the lawyers and the computer scientists in a room, you give them a couple of tools. There's lots of legal tech tools out there and lots of vendors that are, very keen to get students to use them. And you teach them the basics of product design. The computer science students can learn from the law students, because that's the problem set. And the law students will learn from the computer science students how to solve problems in a different way.
Can I do a quick plug for SCL while I'm here? So, one of the rules we see at SCL is that we were set up in 1973 to be this tech law network, but increasingly we see that our members should not be tech lawyers.
Computer law and computer law. Is it SCL?
Society for Computers and Law. And so a lot of our focus recently has been on we need to educate the lawyers in the technology. Yes, they want to know about the legal issues, but actually we ran this whole kind of back to basics program when we taught them as part of that about the tech. Come in for a day and we'll tell you about AI and blockchain and cloud and really get you to have at least a decent understanding of the technology itself, because you can't really advise properly in this area if you don't have a decent understanding. So even if you don't end up coding at law school, I think all lawyers should have a basic grasp of these technologies, because they're going to be relevant to their practice.
Okay, thank you, Sue. So I'd like now to move on to, obviously, an associated issue, which is the challenges that firms are facing then, and how they're characterising those challenges to evolve, technically, culturally, mindset-wise. Alastair, what's your observation, having been a venture builder, well, still a venture builder, I think, and an academic, and now doing all kinds of great engineering work for a law firm? What do you think the challenges are, and how do you think, generally, the environment you're in now is responding?
I think there's people in the audience that might take umbrage with the word academic, possibly sheep in wolf's clothing. But I think going to very much law should be as important in other departments as other departments' areas of expertise are in law, right? You should just have a lot more people understanding systems of law and how law is administered, given that it's foundational, right? You can't, it underpins literally everything we do, right? It creates intersubjective realities. It shapes culture, it shapes behaviours, etc. So I feel like as much as it is on any student to understand a bit more of the technical underpinnings of a society built in this century, it goes the other way, right?
You made a really good point about paper, being a really mature technology. I thought that was
Well,
a
it
really
is.
good analogy for people to understand where you're suggesting people should have that knowledge and be able to apply.
Yeah, I think I started pre-paper, right? I started with the buller in sort of, I don't know, 8,000 BC, which is clay and stones. And we've gone through, layer in any area of practice or activity, we go through layer after layer or strata of sets of technologies that can deliver that. And we're just getting to the point where the prevalence and stability of computational systems in a computational economy mandate that some of the apparatus of the practice of law is computational. And we're at the sort of tipping point where, from an engineering perspective, it was, well, let's call it IT and replicate the incumbent methodologies of doing it to actually let's have a think about how we would do this, right? Yes, we've got more powerful systems to, say, find the needle in the haystack that we can't at the moment using manpower, but, we've got projects with HMRC in terms of structure of stamp duty. We've got research projects with the land registry on the structure of transacting title deeds, and so we're at the very beginnings of this. But I don't think the onus is on, the onus is on all of the different disciplines that impinge upon something that's so central for society, for its operation, right? To take it seriously, and equally not be disparaging of like, oh, that's that's the legal stuff. Those are the words over there, right? I think the only thing I'd say again to what was apparently a fairly legal audience is that 2018 was quite a transformational year in terms of natural language processing, in terms of the transfer learning working at a model level with text data, and therefore, if you'd come in 2016 and said, oh, I'm going to do a whole load of stuff around interpreting or giving responses to text-based inputs, you would have been like, yeah, okay, whatever, but, it doesn't really work. But, if you come and ask the same question at the end of 2019, there's a fair chance that some version of it as long as the baseline is low enough, will start to work. And so I feel like, again, it's a slight paradigm shift in what is the art of the possible.
Great, thank you. So the guys who put their hands up when Jeremy asked who wants to be a lawyer, any of you still here? There's 3 or 4. No, there's more than one. You haven't sent them away. So I'm really interested, actually. Anya, are you still here with can we take my microphone, perhaps as well, and line a couple of people up, because I'd really like to hear.
I thought you were making.
I'm just really interested to hear what you thought of what you've heard. So should we start with you?
Hi, Max Tranter, Edinburgh University. I think my biggest... I'll start with a question, which was obviously you guys are from Big Law, the 3 of you. Sorry, Ruth. You're from Big Law, and it's great to hear how you guys are going to be using the technology, but what about the potential threat of disruption to Big Law from these technologies, from the alternative legal service providers, from what happens when this technology gets so good that actually what the lawyers at Norton, Rhodes, Baker, McKenzie, what they do starts to become taken over by cheaper, being the key word, guys who are offering the same service with just equipped with technology effectively.
Okay, we'll take that one in a moment, and then, yes?
Hi, I don't know if I actually qualify here because I'm a trainee at the moment.
You are entitled to ask a question, please.
Yeah. I was actually curious about whether you could use AI and predictive, the machine learning essentially, to be able to improve the way that we set fees for clients. Because from sort of personal conversations I've had with friends of mine who work at companies that hire lawyers, they find the way that we set fees really annoying, essentially.
Great.
So
Excellent.
There's a better way of doing it, maybe.
Yeah. So we've got a minute. So sadly, but I might go over just a little bit, Ben, if that's all right. Oh, he's gone. That's okay. Oh no, he's there. Right. So fees. Okay. If you're better, you're going to charge less using technology or using AI to set fees differently?
I think you're absolutely right in that most business professionals who understand pricing think when they join a law firm that it's crazy, or historically the approach to pricing has been crazy. I mean, I think this is an area which is increasingly data-driven, right? And we use business professionals all the time to help us come up with sensible fixed fee quotes and other pricing models. So you're absolutely right. I think historically, when I started 20 years ago, people would go, how much will it cost? Finger in the air, right? It was not data-driven at all. Whereas, if you get your data together, you can say, look, we've done these kinds of projects a million times before. How much did they come out at? Let's drive into the data and model it properly. So I think that's definitely the way we're headed. I think that's absolutely why. That's the kind of thing we absolutely need to be doing in order to be able to compete with the alternative providers that are out there. We're all very aware of the alternative providers. We're trying to provide some of those services and products ourselves. But I think increasingly over time, the word collaboration will be more prevalent. We're starting to do that. But in the same way as the banks now work with the best of breeds where they can, if they don't have the innovation or the capabilities in-house, that's what law firms like ours are going to be doing more and more of, I think.
So that's great value, because you got 2 questions answered for the price of one by one lawyer. Hurrah, Sue. Right, so very briefly, Ben, I promise we won't go over too long. One of the things I wanted to ask the guys was they've obviously focused and concentrated on being able to talk and give you some value. But what I also asked them to do was to think about, okay, at the end of this 40 minutes together on stage, what's come out of it for you in terms of perhaps, I hadn't thought about that quite in that way before, or I'm definitely going to go and think about it, or we definitely need to have a coffee about some aspect of what, not just what you're saying, but what you've heard other people saying. So I'm just going to go quickly this way. Actually, we'll start with you, Ruth. How about that?
I actually think from the panel discussion we've had today, it just kind of reaffirms our philosophy at Luminance, which is that law firms are thinking about it and just know that it is imperative that they do something to innovate. They may not all choose the same path, but they do realize that AI is here and it's something that they're going to have to adopt in order to keep future trainees interested and working there, as well as to compete with all the other service providers as well.
I think my main takeaway, has come from what Alastair was saying, is that we're always very inward focused, but as lawyers, I think what we should be doing is getting out there in the community a bit more and explaining our side of the tale, and probably engaging better with the technologists. It's not just about us becoming more tech savvy, it's about getting the technologists to be more legally savvy, and we are the customers, so we need to help train them in terms of what they need to know.
I'm disappointed at the show of hands at the beginning and the show of hands at the end. Right? I think this is an exceptionally wonderful time to be entering into the profession. I would encourage you all to do it.
I'm going to go for a bit of a strange one, but a specific one. Looking outside of the legal profession as the way that, for influencers in the adoption and uptake of AI, in particular the insurance industry. So that would be my takeaway. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So thanks very much for your attention and energy this afternoon. And if you wouldn't mind giving our panelists a round of applause.